Hi, Mako.
Hey, good to see you, Julia.
Good to see you. How are you doing?
Good. I did want to show you something, which is the sketchbook that you got from you and your father made for you. We talked about this last time. And so I just been using Cochineal. I think I told you that last time. And each page gets lighter and lighter.
Wow.
So yeah, so we'll see how this goes. I guess I'm about halfway done. So I was looking forward
What
to
is it
start.
like for you to work through a book like that?
Oh, I love it. It resonates with me. And there's something about I like diptychs and triptychs.
Yes.
It gives me a certain, I guess, frame to move into the painting with. So um, that's been my go-to structure. So this book form is same thing. It allows me to think about, well, the vertical line of the split pages and then creating a horizontal, right? So it works well that way.
Yeah. I think of diptychs and triptychs. They're in conversation with each other, right? And the book is a different way of constructing that conversation.
Yeah, totally. And it
Um,
creating interdependent elements, they're
yes.
connected. It can be distinct, but yeah.
Yeah. Edward Hirsch has a line in a poem that he wrote as an homage to Agnes Martin
Mm.
about her living above the line.
Oh, nice. Great.
And what you said just hold that line to remembrance as well.
Well, Agnes is constantly in my mind, so she's yeah, she's being invoked here in my studio. Amazing, amazing artist, and yeah, and of course, there's Japanese tradition of screen paintings, and that was done to create semi-portable art in a land of earthquakes and typhoons. Uh, but at the same time, artisans would use the screen folded. So if it's folded in a certain way and looking at it from another angle, you create another image, so to speak. So depending on the angle, the image can change.
Yes.
And I love that about this kind of a structure where you kind of see, of course, this is a fold out, but depending on the angle, you can kind of relate to it differently. And if it was placed like this or even closed, you have a different relationship to the image. So uh, yeah, so I don't necessarily think about that when I'm painting, but
Yeah.
I think when you um, think about the reason why you're drawn to it, that's probably one of the entry points.
Yeah. Upon reflection, you're like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's one of the great things about being an artist is you have an intuitive knowing. And
yeah.
then when you reflect, you're like, oh yeah, and it's because of this, 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 and this.
Right. You're intuiting a lot of it, and also you learn to work with materials that you're resonating with, right? So that's part of the process of being an artist is to constantly look to see, what materials really express what you're feeling like you're trying to say, and that takes a while. So
Yeah.
I find that, yeah.
Yeah. And you just came back from travels, and I'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, we were in Amsterdam. What a city. First time we've been there, so it was quite a treat. And we got to go to Van Gogh Museum. And in the same afternoon, we went to Anne Frank House. Just a devastating combination if you think about it. just this extraordinary beauty, so intense, in Van Gogh's case, and then just overwhelming sadness, but sobering, but also important because we live in a time where that kind of things can happen even here in America. So we learned a lot by going, but each museum is so well curated there. I thought I've seen good curation until we walked into many of the museums there, even small ones have just amazing um, way to be hospitable. I guess that's the best word, and care about the audience, and all the aspects of representing a viewpoint for and to help you to understand what it is that you're looking at. So it was really amazing.
Yeah. And I saw on social media you had the opportunity to track down Van Gogh's sermon.
Yes, that was before we went. We wanted to visit the library, which is a part of Van Gogh Museum. Uh, but you have to make an appointment separately. There are, turns out, two scholars working there, constantly there. And but if you request early enough, they'll help you find what you're looking for. And I wanted to find Van Gogh's first sermon, which really nobody talks about the fact that he wanted to be a pastor just like his father, and and he really wasn't allowed to for various good reasons. But he did preach a sermon, and it turns out to be, and we did find the sermon. It's in one of the letters that he wrote to his brother, Theo. And it is in English. He preached in English. And so right away, right, you surprise people. He could speak and write in five languages. This doesn't sound like the madman that we know. And he preached a sermon in near London in a Methodist church, seeking to be a pastor. Um, he had this opportunity to preach at a Methodist church, and so he did that. And you can read this sermon. As it turns out, in one of the letters, it's he copied it in English to his brother, um, and you can read it today. Now, if you were judging sermons, this would not be one of the best sermons you ever heard. It is rather unfocused and yet beautifully written. And it sounds like a painting, what he was depicting. This was before he discovered his real passion for painting. Um, but he was trying to describe the world with God's glory embedded throughout, and beauty was a big part of that. So you can read this sermon. You can find it in, I believe, in the collection letters, uh, comprehensive collection, because a lot of times when, again, publishers select letters of Van Gogh, they don't really curate it in a way that would say that this person was trying to please God, honor God, follow Christ. Imitation of Christ was his favorite book. He practiced it every day. Did he do that perfectly? No, but just like all of us, he was a sojourner in his pilgrimage, and paintings literally became his sermons. Every painting is a sermon, And going through Van Gogh's museum, um, I had this privilege of walking with a friend, a couple, and I was describing to them every painting and what Van Gogh was seeing and how he wanted to capture uh, both the glory of God and how far away we have gotten from God. Um, and that is visually very explicit, I would say, in every painting. So it was kind of a good discovery. We were very excited to find it, and of course, there's no original other than the letter. So um, we were able to find it in one of the selections of Van Gogh letters that uh, and read it really over and over to appreciate who he was.
So special.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also saw that you got to experience Studio Drift's falling flowers, the mechanized flowers.
Oh yes, 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 yes. That was fascinating. At the Rijksmuseum, there was this installation, and my goodness, that museum has all of the masterpieces from Rembrandt to Vermeer. But then they created a contemporary wing where that piece is on the way to the exhibit, and it was an extraordinary experience just walking, through centuries and then walking into some very innovative works of art. That piece is fantastic.
Yeah, I've followed them on social media for a while, and
Okay.
then to see that you got to experience it, right? Like, what does it feel like?
Well, it's installed on as you're going out into the staircase, and it fits perfectly there because I guess you can install it site specific to wherever it's being installed. Um, but it feels like immediately you feel like you're underwater. Because, it's funny because it looks like an umbrella, upside down umbrella, but they look like jellyfish, right? You're kind of and so you're mesmerized by it, and the speed in which it drops um, can surprise you because you're not expecting anything moving when you're coming out of an exhibit, and then you stare at it for a long time because it's just each component has different rhythms, and you're really yeah mesmerized by it. And so Haejin and I was looking at it and you can kind of to go down the steps and look from that angle too. And each angle, as you know, with good installation, every angle gives you something different, right? So we were kind of looking around, and nobody else was there, right? Because they're in the galleries, looking at Rembrandts, and here we are in the stairway, just beholding this beautiful piece.
Yeah. Because it's in a liminal space.
It is in liminal space, and that's part of the message, I suppose. It really is makes you feel. Um, there's a sense in which art makes you feel eccentric, and then
Mm.
you realize that's who we are. Like we are eccentric beings. And there's a way of understanding ourselves if you accept that, um, and then art can be transgressive to our normative realities, but then you realize, well, what is normal? Isn't it upside down? That sort of thing. So yeah.
Did you happen to notice the sound of it?
Yes, it it was echoey there, and there was this ambient. Is that like a music installed, or is that part of the
I don't
mechanism?
know
Okay,
about that specific installation
yeah,
of
yeah.
because they have multiple installations of it. I would also love to see those installed in like the Turbine Hall
Uh-huh.
um,
Yeah.
in London, but it's just at the Tate. But they're just so captivating how the fabric flows, right?
Yeah.
And they're mechanized, so how does the hydraulic of it sound, etc.
Yeah, so the mechanism, in a piece like that can be, can detract from the beauty of it, right? The sensitivity of it. Um, but what's wonderful about that piece is, again, the speed of it surprises you, and yeah, it creates a different kind of relationship because you just went through an entire museum with pieces that are just still, and you're gazing into it, and all of a sudden it's like dropping, and you're like, what? And but that kind of creation of something that surprises you, or is constantly moving. It is just fascinating to me how artists sees every facet of experience, and there's intentionality and everything that is being done. And the fabric itself, this heavy fabric has its own sound, right? So when it drops, it just fluffs, open, and it kind of reminds you of these very festive, when you open a parasol, or it evokes memories.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that was a memorable piece.
And I asked about the sound because I've been thinking so much about the concept of quiet.
Yeah,
We talk a lot about what it is to listen to a piece
right.
and what it is to interact in a reflective way.
Hmm.
But what is it to be quiet?
Hmm. Hmm.
And there's a nuance and a dichotomy there that I'm working through,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um, and I wonder how you could speak to that.
Well, I love thinking about that. I think when I am making, I am listening, right? There's definitely, I've come to realize that I am more driven by movement of sound than, even though what I'm doing is very visual, every piece of mine is composed in that sense.
Mhm,
Not in a linear way, but with layers, with resonance and refractive elements, all those things become part of my listening experience. And the quiet definitely is this a, a place of repose, or at least safety, that I need to create. And, being a high introvert, of course, I like being alone and or just working in the studio. But it's more than that. I think there's some way of, even in a museum, right? There's a difference between, having a checklist of works so that you can take a photo and move on and say, I saw Mona Lisa. But that's not really seeing, right? And when you're really looking at a piece, I stood there in one of the Rembrandt paintings, uh, The Watchman, I think it's called. It's a large piece, and they're renovating it. So it's behind this uh, glass, but audience can look at the restorers working on it. And that in itself is fascinating for, just to watch. But watching people look at this painting is also fascinating. How children approach it, what do they see, what kind of questions do they ask, how just tourists coming in, um, some would, read what's happening, the history of the piece and so forth. Some don't, right? They come, they see it, they go. And then people like us stand there for about an hour just observing this whole thing. Of course, we're interested in the painting, and painting can tell you a lot about Rembrandt and that time and what was going on historically. Um, but there's something about listening to all of it, right? The people, talking about the painting, talking not about the painting, talking about nothing at all. They were just moving into one room to another. And I find that fascinating. Just sit and observe what people react to. Um, and the painting is about, watching night of extraordinary circumstances happen when the city was invaded and they stood guard, you know. And so it made me think about that. What were they listening to? What were they afraid of? Or, what were they saying to each other? What kind of conversations? And more importantly, what did Rembrandt hear, in working in that piece? So yeah, fascinating way to look at it.
And then Rembrandt choosing that as the subject matter
Hmm.
and thinking about our role as artists as the watchers.
Right, right, because we're watching them, and yeah, there's one painting of Rembrandt that literally these people they look like accountants, they're like public servants of some kind, but they are startled. And they remember and capture that moment where, I think there's five men, and all of a sudden they're looking at looking at the person that came into the room. But, you know, they're not looking at Rembrandt, they're looking at you, the viewer who just came in. It's absolutely brilliant. It's very cinematic, and so Rembrandt is very aware of the relationship between the viewer and his art. And he's kind of playing tricks sometimes. He'll push certain ways of how the viewer may respond. Um, what are we drawn to? There are priorities, I guess, of what the viewer is supposed to see, and then Rembrandt plays tricks on that and places something very important. Oh, Night Watch is the title of the painting, Night Watch. But there's a girl kind of turned back to the whole scene, and you don't really see her immediately. She's kind of in the back, but this angelic figure becomes very prominent once you notice her. And clearly, this is like Annunciation, right? Night Watch, right? There's something happening that is breaking open, and Rembrandt is, you know, fiercely guarding um, the history of the city, these people that he was depicting, but also a stage in which these terrific events, celestial event can come into our world, in this moment when you look back and say, "Oh, God was there," um, and that visceral kind, again, cinematic experience is. I don't think there's has ever been anybody else who could do that with paint. Um, there'll be artists who could create moments, like Bill Viola videos or Agnes Martin paintings that holds the gaze. But yeah, Rembrandt is a remarkable uh, genius in that way.
Yeah. And it reminds me of how you were talking about Van Gogh and each painting being a sermon,
Hmm.
and then Rembrandt with The Night Watch and that being a sermon,
Yes, yes, yeah.
and then your own work and your own paintings being sermons.
Mhm. Yeah, well, that's an interesting. I don't. I never thought about, but facing Rembrandt and Vermeer as well, actually,
Mm,
and also Van Gogh, you can't help but to think, first of all, how did we miss this? Right, kind of thing. And you know, there were moments when we felt like they didn't get this painting, like even though it was very well curated, but maybe because it was so well curated, they kind of show you what they're thinking about, the assumptions that they're making, and and we just felt like, well, these are all witnesses of divine, divine conspiracy, as uh, one of our friends talked about. There, there's certain things that cannot be revealed unless you really understand, like you don't really get the parable of Jesus. You're not supposed to, you're supposed to talk about it, and you're supposed to, listen deeply to the, what is generative. And same thing with paintings. You don't explain it away, and sometimes curators in their zeal to help explain it don't allow the mystery to hover, and but the context and language of that, I I think is very important, and artists tend to not want an explanation, right? Rothko didn't want to explain his work at all, which is understandable. And yet, it's his writings that help us to behold them.
mhm,
Same thing in Van Gogh. It's his letters to Theo that opens up realities of who he was and why he was painting. And there's clearly much more to Vincent van Gogh than we know.
mhm,
So we came away thinking, well, um, I want to dig some more in Haejin, from the law side, right, the advocacy side. Uh, there's certain injustices that Vincent experienced that we really need to help understand. Um, and it felt like with Rembrandt, um, it was also this, because he ended up losing everything, right? At the end of his life, he had nothing, and you look at his self-portraits, so last days, and he was glowing with light.
mhm,
What did he have that allowed him to have that kind of confidence? and faith, and and of course that is not something you hear about Rembrandt when we talk about him. So my work is more, I guess, open to that vantage point, and even though I am not like Vincent trying to lay out a parable or um, you know message of any explicit way or coded way. I do think um, the visceral experience that I want people to have as my work is a portal into new creation. I literally believe that. So I think um, to the extent that I can help a little bit in guiding people into that, um, I think is important.
And I think your new book will talk a lot about that.
Oh yes. Oh, it is a journey into the light. Yeah, it came out as it came about because my editor asked me, what do you see in the world? Can you guide us? And so my book is all about that because it is literally walking to the studio. The 25-meter walk that I have from the farmhouse to the studio became a whole chapter, and then more. And then I'm walking into the studio. As you know, I have this liturgy of getting preparing to paint, which is just as important as painting, and then you know intuiting what's happening with the air and uh, seasons and light and everything. So all of that process, and then things that I think about when I'm waiting for paintings to dry, or um, what I note about particular materials, really has a journey, uh, call it the journey into the light, but it really also is a historical look back at Japanese history. Where did this material come from? Why did the artisans, refine this glue in this way? And what's the history behind it, and so forth. So it just expands. The more I wrote, the more expansive it became.
I'm looking forward to reading all about it.
Yeah, thank you for asking.
Of
And
course.
yeah, so
So good.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing all these experiences.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I'll post some photos with this talk. So
Oh, good.
conversation, yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mako.
Okay, good to see you, Julia.
Bye.
Bye.